Pre-flight tensions. The terminal buzzed with the familiar symphony of rolling suitcases, clipped announcements, and intermittent chatter. In the far concourse gate of Terminal C, Flight 422 to Washington, D.C., prepared to board. Special Agent Malik Thompson stood beside the jet bridge, adjusting the lapel of his charcoal gray suit. The FBI badge, gold-rimmed blue enamel star, rested snugly in an inner pocket of his blazer, its weight both reassuring and resolute. At 36, Malik had learned to read a room the way others read newspapers. He noted the dozen or so passengers in line, a college student juggling textbooks and a backpack nearly as big as she was, a young couple chatting about business conference schedules, a mother soothing a restless toddler. And then there was Clarence Whitfield, the lone man at the tail end of the queue. His crisp khaki slacks and starched white shirt bespoke middle-class success, but his thin lips pursed into a perpetual frown. He lingered just a beat too long, hands clenching the handle of his carry-on as though it were a shield. Malik offered a polite nod to the flight attendant in Navy uniform. "Agent Thompson," she said, her tone almost deferential as she scanned his credentials. "Thank you for your patience." He smiled quietly. Security protocols meant a few extra minutes, but he'd filed more sensitive reports in worse circumstances. "No problem," he replied, sliding his badge back inside. His eyes flicked down the jet bridge. 20 rows of seats, 3 on each side of the aisle. Seat 17B, center of the action, yet unobtrusive enough for the cybercrime briefing he'd be conducting as soon as he landed. The cabin door hissed open, and one by one, passengers filed past him. Malik stepped aboard, offering his boarding pass to the attendant before settling into the window seat. He placed a battered leather briefcase in the overhead bin, a repository of encrypted documents and digital forensics, and then slipped his jacket onto the back of the seat. The hush inside the plane felt insulated, a bubble separate from the clamor of the airport beyond. As Malik buckled his seatbelt, he caught sight of Whitfield approaching the same row. Their eyes met briefly. Malik's calm, measured gaze against Whitfield's flicker of discomfort. The older man forced a tight smile before ducking into seat 17C, the aisle seat directly across. Malik's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd learned to expect courtesy in most professional circles. But prejudice, he discovered, lurked in unexpected places. The flight attendant glided down the aisle. "Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." Her voice was warm, but businesslike. Malik sat upright, hands folded in his lap, as she demonstrated the safety protocols. Across the aisle, Whitfield's gaze drifted from the demonstration card to Malik's suit lapel, no badge visible there, and back again, as though parsing some hidden message in Malik's composed posture. Malik closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled slowly. In the high-stress world of federal law enforcement, calm was both shield and strategy. He reflected on the case waiting for him in D.C. A ransomware syndicate targeting public utilities, an insidious threat cloaked in lines of code. But here, in the artificial twilight of the plane's overhead lights, another threat simmered, one born of centuries-old bias and fear. The rumble of the beverage cart approaching snapped him back. Whitfield shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. He coughed once, twice, louder than necessary, drawing the flight attendant's attention. "Excuse me," he called softly. "Is that gentleman over there? I mean, in 17B, is he with you?" He looked pointedly at Malik, nodding toward the suit and the unassuming briefcase. The attendant paused, tray in hand. "Sir?" she said, her professional smile faltering. 17B is... well, he hasn't checked in with me aside from boarding. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. I feel uneasy." He cleared his throat again, forcing his words. "I paid for this seat, for this comfort. I'd like to know who he is." The tension rippled outward. Other passengers glanced over, eyebrows raised. The cart's contents rattled as the attendant hesitated. Malik opened his eyes. He inclined his head. "Sir, I'm Special Agent Thompson with the FBI," he said, voice low but firm. "I'm on official business to D.C. There's no cause for concern." He reached slowly into his jacket. Whitfield recoiled slightly, white-knuckling the armrest. In that suspended moment, the badge emerged. Gold seal reflecting the cabin lights. Department of Justice, arcing above the star. Whitfield's bravado crumbled. His jaw slackened. The color drained from his cheeks. A ripple of whispered astonishment coursed through the aisle. FBI? On the plane? Malik held the badge out, arms steady. I understand your discomfort, he said evenly. But I assure you, I'm here to do my job and get home safely. That's all. He slipped the badge back inside, restoring the equilibrium he'd trained to maintain. The cart rolled on toward the back. The attendant, recovering her composure, offered Whitfield a small apology. Sir, if there's nothing else, please remain seated. She smiled reassuringly at Malik before continuing her service. Whitfield stared down at his folded hands. Passengers resumed shuffling overhead luggage and settling in. The toddler across the aisle reached for a toy, oblivious to the drama. Malik sank into his seat, exhaling quietly. He allowed himself a moment to reflect, a reminder that even in the elite echelons of law enforcement, the scourge of prejudice could surface anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Malik leaned his head back. The nighttime city lights blurred past the window, a tapestry of motion and mercury street lamps. He checked his watch again, 9:15 p.m. Soon enough, he'd be on familiar ground, briefing colleagues who judged him on results, not skin. Tonight, however, the flight illustrated that his true work extended beyond cybercrime rings. It encompassed racial animus, ignorance, and the long arc of history bending toward justice. He gazed across at Whitfield, who stared forward, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. Malik's heart held no malice, only resolve. The journey ahead would include tougher adversaries and more entrenched biases, but agents like him, badge or no, carried the promise of accountability. If this flight served any purpose, it was a small collision of authority and ignorance, a chance reminder that equality wasn't merely a legal principle, but a daily practice. The cabin lights dimmed further as the seatbelt sign winked off. Malik closed his eyes again, steeling himself for takeoff, and for whatever lay beyond the horizon of DC's Capitol buildings. In the crucible of air and authority, he'd already staked a claim. Prejudice could falter, if only someone held it to the light. First signs. The overhead speakers crackled as the pilot announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 422 is now taxiing to runway 3. We anticipate takeoff in approximately 5 minutes." The low hum of the engines grew louder, rattling the windows and seats. Malik Thompson settled in, straightening his tie and pulling a slim tablet from his briefcase. He tapped the screen, bringing up the encrypted dossier he would review once airborne. Across the aisle, Clarence Whitfield shifted in his seat, the fabric squeaking under his weight. He glanced at Malik, then at the window, then back at Malik again, as if trying to decode the man's presence. His skin flushed slightly. A vein throbbed at his temple. With a discreet cough, he reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a folded newspaper, holding it up at eye level so that only his eyes and forehead were visible. Malik noticed, but said nothing. He had learned that confrontation often inflamed situations. He slipped on a pair of noise-canceling headphones, clicked off the tablet's screen, and leaned back. But even the soft hum of classical music leaking through the headphones couldn't drown out the tension vibrating through the cabin. The beverage cart clattered past, and the flight attendant muttered a polite apology to each passenger she bumped into. Whitfield cocked his head and called, "Excuse me, miss?" The attendant halted, balancing drink trays with practiced ease. Whitfield lowered his newspaper. "Is he?" He nodded toward Malik. "Traveling on official business? I mean, what is he doing here?" The attendant swallowed. She hesitated before answering as though measuring her words. "Sir, everyone here has a valid boarding pass, and beyond that, I don't have clearance to share personal information." She cleared her throat and slipped her hand over her name tag. "I'm here to serve refreshments, not to judge passengers." Whitfield sighed. "Forgive me," he said stiffly, folding the paper and placing it on his lap. He diverted his gaze toward the aisle, though the cart had already moved on. Other passengers had cast brief glances at the exchange, some with curiosity, others with polite disinterest. Malik slipped off his headphones and raised an eyebrow. "Sir?" he said quietly, voice steady. "Is there something you need?" He folded his hands over the briefcase on his lap, exposing the FBI lapel pin he wore. Whitfield flinched, but he did not recoil as markedly as he had when Malik first flashed his badge. Instead, he sank deeper into his seat. Malik continued softly. "If you have a question, I'd be happy to answer it." He kept his expression neutral. The plane's rumble set a rhythmic backdrop to the charged silence. Whitfield's mouth opened, then closed. He licked his lips. "No, it's nothing." He stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the seatback video monitors. A bead of sweat glinted on his upper lip. Malik returned to his tablet, pretending to study the dossier. But he observed Whitfield's hands, clawed around the armrests, knuckles white. The older man's discomfort was palpable. It was not the turbulence. They had yet to leave the ground, but something far more insidious. Suspicion born of skin color. A deep rumble from the engines preceded a slight jolt as the aircraft crept over a patch of uneven tarmac. Whitfield gasped and grabbed the armrest, glancing sideways as if looking for someone to blame. Malik lowered his headphones and offered a small, reassuring smile, even though none was required. The gesture seemed to irritate Whitfield further. He turned away. Malik closed his eyes and leaned his head against the seat. He allowed memories of past assignments to flood in. Undercover stings in crowded bars, stakeouts in the dead of night, negotiations with reluctant informants. Each mission had its own risks, but none rivaled the low-grade hostility that bubbled beneath the surface in moments like this. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as attendants prepared for takeoff. Whitfield coughed again, louder this time, drawing looks from the couple behind Malik. The young woman exchanged a glance with her partner, rolled her eyes and whispered, "What's his problem?" Malik caught only fragments, but he understood perfectly. "Sir," the flight attendant said quietly as she passed down the aisle again, "please fasten your seatbelt and ensure all electronic devices are off or in airplane mode." She paused at Whitfield's seat. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Whitfield's voice trembled. "No, thank you." He reached up, clicked his belt, and tightened it. His face was pale, eyes darting between Malik and the attendant. The tension crackled. Malik closed his eyes and inhaled slowly, centering himself. In his mind, he ran through the opening lines of his briefing. "Good morning, team. Let's review the network vulnerabilities we've identified." He reminded himself that the work ahead required focus, not frustration. The plane jolted again as it moved onto the runway. Whitfield stiffened, as though bracing for a collision that wasn't coming. Malik reached down, slipped his badge into his blazer pocket, and tapped the tablet's screen. The encrypted files glowed. Logs of unauthorized access attempts, traces of malicious code. But his peripheral vision caught Whitfield's twitching foot, tapping an uneven rhythm on the floor. Malik removed his headphones and closed the file. He looked across the aisle. "Mr. Whitfield," he said softly, "if there's something on your mind, I'd prefer we discuss it now rather than later. I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable." Whitfield's jaw clenched. He exhaled a shuddering breath. "My apologies, Agent Thompson," he said, voice low. "It's just..." He swallowed. "Just never expected to share a flight with someone like you. It's unsettling." Malik's heart sank at the words. He fought the urge to respond sharply. Instead, he leaned forward. "I understand," he said evenly. "Preconceptions can be hard to shake. But we're all professionals here. Let's start fresh." Whitfield stared at him, eyes wide. A flicker of shame crossed his face. He nodded once, slowly. "Understood." The engines roared as the plane lifted into the night sky. The city lights dwindled below, replaced by the black expanse dotted with distant stars. Malik glanced out the window, then back at Whitfield. The older man seemed smaller now, framed by the glow of the window screen. Malik settled back, hands folded. He drew in a steadying breath. The conflict had not yet erupted, but the first seeds of hostility had taken root. In the quiet after takeoff, he realized that the true journey was only beginning. A confrontation not just of prejudice, but of human connection. As the seatbelt sign flickered off, the attendant's voice floated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. You may now use approved electronic devices." Whitfield exhaled, releasing the tension he'd held like a shield. He touched the seatbelt, and then let his fingers drift to the armrest. Malik closed his eyes and nodded to himself. The moment had passed for now. But he remained alert, aware that the simmering unease could flare at any time. The first signs of prejudice had shown their face, subtle, insistent. And like a cancer, if left unchecked, they threatened to spread. In the hush of the cabin, Malik resolved to watch carefully, ready to confront the darkness when it surfaced again. The demand. The soft chime of the captain's seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin, a precursory note before the more commanding roar of the engines. Flight 422 had leveled off at 35,000 feet, and the overhead lights dimmed to a twilight glow. Passengers adjusted their seats, some dozing, others tapping away on phones or tablets. Special Agent Malik Thompson glanced at the digital clock on his tablet. 9:42 p.m. He tapped the screen, scrolling through snippets of code and encrypted messages he'd soon present to his colleagues in Washington. Every line was critical, every byte a potential clue in unraveling the web of cybercriminals he pursued. Across the aisle, Clarence Whitfield sat rigidly, shoulders squared, arms folded. His frown had deepened into a permanent crease just below his hairline. Earlier, the revelation of Malik's FBI credentials had visibly rattled him, but the tremor in his knuckles suggested the unease hadn't subsided. It had only sharpened. Whitfield stared straight ahead, as if expecting the wall to deliver an explanation for why a man like Malik could be so calm, so composed, instead of primed for trouble. Malik closed his tablet and placed it on the fold-down tray. He leaned back, hands clasped, ready to let the routine in-flight service proceed undisturbed. The flight attendant appeared at the front, pulling on a cart of water and soda. She navigated the narrow aisle with practiced ease until she reached Malik. "Would you like something to drink, Agent Thompson?" she asked, offering a bottle of water. "Thank you," Malik replied, accepting the bottle and setting it in the cup holder. "Just water, please." He looked across at Whitfield. "Sir," he said quietly, "would you like anything?" Whitfield's eyes flitted to the cart, then back to Malik. He pursed his lips. "No, thank you," he snapped, his tone sharper than necessary. The flight attendant moved on, and Whitfield's gaze returned to his lap. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the ventilation system. Malik took a sip of water, then settled his hands on his briefcase, ready to return to his work. But another cough, this one more deliberate, split the quiet. Malik looked up. Whitfield held the aisle seat armrest as though bracing for impact. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough to carry. The flight attendant at the rear glanced up and moved forward again, eyes widening in recognition of the brewing confrontation. Whitfield stood, abandoning his soda can half-finished on the empty seat beside him. The overhead bin clicked open as he reached inside, retrieving a small leather wallet. "Miss," he said, voice unsteady, "I'm requesting that this passenger," he nodded toward Malik, "be removed from this aircraft." His words were clipped, each one sharper than the last. The cabin's ambient glow seemed to flare under the spotlight his demand had created. Malik's chest tightened. He rose, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Sir," he said, voice measured, "why do you want me removed?" Whitfield's jaw flexed. "Because," he spat out the word as though it carried its own venom, "I don't feel safe around you." A murmur rippled through the other passengers. The couple seated behind Malik exchanged bewildered looks. The college student clutched her backpack as though bracing for a storm. The flight attendant approached, placing a hand lightly on Whitfield's arm. "Sir," she said, voice calm but firm, "I'm afraid we can't remove someone for how they look." She glanced at Malik's pinned FBI badge, then back at Whitfield. "Please be seated." Whitfield's face flushed crimson. He stared past Malik, toward the bulkhead, as though pleading for an ally. I have the right to feel secure, he insisted. I paid for this seat. I shouldn't have to endure this. His hand gestured vaguely at the man who had done nothing but breathe the same recycled air. Malik held up his hands in a gesture of conciliation. Sir, I'm conducting official business, he said, voice calm but resolute. I'm not a threat to anyone on this flight. If you have concerns, I'll be happy to answer any questions. He glanced at the crew, silently signaling his willingness to de-escalate. Still, Whitfield shook his head. This isn't about your credentials, he said, tone heavy with resentment. It's about how you make me feel. He swallowed hard, as though forcing the words past an internal barrier. I'm sorry. That's the truth. Malik retained his composure. I understand you feel uneasy, he said gently. But you're safe. I assure you my only concern is completing my assignment. The flight attendant spoke up again. Sir, please sit down. I'll notify the cockpit, and we'll see what the captain advises. She moved off toward the front, whipping out her radio. Whitfield's eyes darted between Malik, the attendant, and the aisle. He inhaled sharply and then seemed to deflate. His shoulders sagged as though the effort of standing had exhausted him. Word by word, he murmured, I apologize. I'm sorry for the trouble. He looked at Malik, eyes wet with shame. I don't know what came over me. Malik exhaled a slow breath. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the aisle. It's all right, sir. Let's talk this out. Whitfield sank back into his seat. Around them, the clearance lights blinked on the walls, and the flight attendant whispered into her radio. A tense minute passed before she approached again. Captain says we'll continue to cruising altitude, she announced. But please remain calm and stay in your seats. As the attendant returned to her duties, Malik sat down beside Whitfield's vacant seat, respectful of the space. He tilted his head. Mr. Whitfield, he said, choosing his words. I get that trust is earned. I'm willing to answer any questions about my assignment, my badge, even my background, if it helps. Whitfield's gaze lingered on the badge peeking out from Malik's jacket lapel. His voice was barely above a whisper. Why would the FBI send someone like you on a flight? He asked. I mean, you're not what I expected. Malik allowed himself a small, empathetic smile. I'm just a professional doing my job, he said. I've tracked cyber threats overseas and handled investigations in 5 countries. This flight was the best route back to headquarters. Whitfield nodded slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm sorry I judged you. I saw a black man in a suit and assumed. I just assumed. His voice cracked. That was wrong. Malik leaned forward, hands open. We all make assumptions, he said kindly. What matters is recognizing them and choosing better. He paused, then added, I'm glad you spoke up. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. The cabin returned to its routine rhythm. Engines humming, pages turning, soft whispers. Whitfield let out a shaky laugh, rubbing his temples. Courage, he echoed. I'm not sure I have much of that. He looked at Malik. But I want to change. Malik nodded. That's the first step. He placed a hand on the armrest between them. Thank you for apologizing. Whitfield met his gaze, the flicker of relief in his eyes unmistakable. Thank you, he said, for not calling security on me. His voice held genuine remorse. Malik uprighted himself as the flight attendant passed. Water refill? She offered. He accepted, and she moved on. The couple behind Malik muttered among themselves, nodding in appreciation of the calm resolution. As the cabin lights brightened slightly for beverage service, Malik settled back against his seat. He reopened his tablet, but this time his fingers hesitated over the screen. He thought of the ransomware files waiting for his attention, minor adversaries compared to the prejudice he had just faced and begun to dismantle. He tapped open a note-taking app and typed a simple line. Confronting bias can be as crucial as any criminal investigation. He closed his eyes, letting the cabin's gentle sway lull him. The demand to remove him had been the fiercest confrontation so far, but it had also opened a door to dialogue, to accountability, to change. And as Flight 422 cruised steadily toward the capital, Malik felt a quiet optimism. Sometimes the most profound victories were won not in courtrooms, but in moments of human reckoning, high above the clouds. Flashing the badge. A sudden bump of turbulence passed through the fuselage just as the dimmed cabin lights brightened for the in-flight service. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing light turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Malik Thompson, a flicker of purpose behind his calm demeanor, rose from 17B, sheet of steel beneath his tailored suit. Across the aisle, Clarence Whitfield sat rigid, eyes narrowing at Malik's deliberate movement. Malik cleared his throat softly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice low yet carrying through the hush. "If I could have your attention, please." He reached inside his jacket, fingertips brushing the cold leather case of his badge. The cabin stilled, half-finished cups clinked on trays, newspapers paused mid-turn, and the hum of the ventilation system became a trapped echo. Malik's knuckles gripped the badge case twice before lifting it into view. The gold and blue seal caught the overhead light, a beacon of authority that blinded prejudice in a single moment. A hush rolled through the rows. The college student in 17A gasped softly, while the couple behind Malik exchanged incredulous looks. Children peered over their parents' shoulders. Even the toddler at 17D craned his neck, curiosity outweighing sleepiness. Malik extended the badge fully, the leather strap dangling like a pendulum of truth. "I am Special Agent Malik Thompson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced. "I am here in an official capacity, returning from a discreet assignment. There is no threat to the safety of this aircraft or its passengers." His tone was firm, but devoid of accusation. Whitfield's face went pale. He stared, unblinking, as if witnessing a stage magician's greatest reveal. The old bristles of his skepticism fell away like leaves in a sudden storm. His lips parted, but no words came. Nearby passengers murmured among themselves, "FBI agent? Is that real? I thought he was just another seatmate." The flight attendant, trolley parked at 17C, stood straighter, her eyes fixed respectfully on Malik. She cleared her throat, though no question hung in the air. Malik replaced the badge in its case and slipped it back inside his jacket with deliberate slowness. Each motion was designed to imprint the image on every witness. He inhaled a steady breath and continued. "I recognize the uneven welcome I've received. Prejudice can cloud our judgment before we even realize it. My presence here is purely professional, no hidden agenda, no undisclosed risk." He scanned the cabin with open palms. "Thank you for your attention. Please enjoy the remainder of your flight." A ripple of applause, soft, tentative, began in the back rows and spread forward. The applause was small but significant, a tangible repudiation of Whitfield's earlier demand. The young couple in 18A offered Malik thumbs up, while the college student gave him a bright smile. The toddler clapped awkward hands against the armrest, delighted by the sudden excitement. Even Whitfield, still seated, managed a weak clap, eyes downcast. Malik sank back into his seat, heart still pounding with adrenaline. The flight attendant, with practiced discretion, resumed her service, offering sodas and juices. As she poured a cup for the student in 17A, she paused and said to Malik, "Thank you for handling that so professionally, Agent Thompson." Her voice was quiet, an ally's whisper. Malik nodded gratefully, gesturing that she needn't say more. Whitfield glanced at Malik, his gaze filled with shame rather than defiance. He opened his wallet and withdrew a small leather-bound notebook, as though seeking refuge in the veneer of business notes. Malik caught the movement and offered a respectful nod, signaling that no further humiliation was intended. The older man's shoulders dropped, the armor of his indignation set aside. Around them, the airplane resumed its rhythm. Passengers returned to magazines, movies began on personal screens, and the hum of soft conversation resumed. Malik reopened his tablet, but before diving into the ransomware dossier, he tapped a fresh note. "Badge as catalyst, the intersection of law and human error." He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, reflecting on the power dynamics a simple credential could wield. Whitfield studied his notebook, then glanced at Malik again. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Agent Thompson," he said, voice strained but sincere. "I'm sorry for assuming the worst, for everything." His words trembled with emotion. "I've lived with old fears I never questioned. Seeing your badge, seeing you, well, it was a wake-up call." Malik closed his tablet and leaned forward. "I appreciate your apology," he said evenly. "Acknowledging our own prejudices isn't easy, but every choice to confront them moves us closer to equity." He extended his hand across the aisle. "Thank you for speaking up." Whitfield reached out, his hand shaking slightly. The handshake was brief, but firm. Around them, a few passengers caught the exchange and offered nods of approval. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight continued into the night, the pale glow of laptop screens illuminating determined faces. Malik settled back, closing his eyes for a moment. He allowed himself a brief reflection. The badge's power was real, yet its true value lay in what it represented, a commitment to upholding justice for all. He thought of the cybercriminals he pursued, hidden behind firewalls and anonymizing proxies. Here, however, the enemy had been simpler, a shadow of fear cast by ignorance. The flight attendant returned to collect empty cups, pausing at Whitfield's seat. "Would you like anything else, sir?" she asked kindly. Whitfield shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." His gaze flickered to Malik's lapel, where the faint outline of the badge remained. As the attendant moved on, Whitfield let out a long sigh. He folded his arms on the tray table and rested his forehead against them, as if releasing a tide of regret. Malik, mindful of privacy and respect, resumed reviewing his case files, allowing Whitfield his moment of contrition. Minutes later, a soft chime heralded the beverage cart's departure. The aisle returned to its usual patterns, patrons stretching, reading, drifting into light sleep. The tension that had coiled around seat row 17 gradually unwound, replaced by the ordinary tranquility of long-haul flight. Malik pocketed his tablet and closed his eyes, envisioning the briefing awaiting him on the ground. Slides detailing network vulnerabilities, timelines of intrusions. Yet, even as he prepared mentally for the work ahead, he recognized that today's skirmish dealt with a different front. The unarmed battle against bias. The badge had served not just to identify his rank, but to catalyze a moment of personal reckoning for both captain and passenger. In the faint glow of the reading light, Whitfield peered across at Malik's profile, eyes closed, brow unfurrowed. He drew a cautious breath, then retrieved a small pen and began to write in his notebook. Malik's presence on this flight would live on in Whitfield's thoughts long after the flight concluded, a living lesson that authority and accountability extend beyond protocols and passwords. As Flight 422 cruised steadily toward its destination, the cabin returned to quiet focus. Among the rows of anonymous travelers, two men shared an unspoken bond forged by a simple emblem. Above the clouds, in a metal tube slicing through darkness, the true power of the badge had revealed itself, not in coercion or spectacle, but in its ability to transform fear into understanding, one flash of gold at a time. Silence and shame. Once the in-flight beverage service concluded and the cabin lights dimmed, a heavy hush settled over Flight 422. The faint glow of personal screens and the occasional rustle of a magazine were the only sounds. Even the toddler in 17D lay still, lulled by the rhythm of the engines. Malik Thompson sat upright in 17B, hands folded over his briefcase, mind racing far beyond the encrypted files on his tablet. Across the aisle, Clarence Whitfield stared at the armrest, knuckles white, as though bracing himself for the world to collapse around him. Malik allowed himself a measured exhale. He reached for his tablet but paused, fingers hovering above the screen. The encounter, Whitfield's demand, the badge's reveal, the hush of reluctant applause, weighed on him more heavily than any ransomware trace. He thought of the countless times he'd flashed that same badge in darker alleys, on the streets of foreign cities, or on the linoleum floors of precincts where prejudice lurked in uniformed corridors. Yet here, 20,000 feet above ground, the simplest display of his credentials had marshaled fear and shame in equal measure. As the seatbelt sign winked off, Malik closed his eyes and let memories surface. The summer he'd been passed over for a promotion in a smoke-filled briefing room. The way a senior colleague shook his hand half-heartedly, as though uncertain whether it belonged to a real agent. The time a witness deflated when he learned the man questioning her was black, a subtle shift in tone that spoke volumes. He'd confronted smug cybercriminals, unmasked violent felons, yet the silent bias of decent people had often proven more insidious than any bulletproof vest could stop. He opened his eyes, blinking against the cabin's muted glow. The pilot's voice crackled overhead. "We'll begin our descent into Washington shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Malik tapped the tablet's screen to lock it and slid it beside him. He took a slow sip of water, savoring the cool clarity. Around him, most passengers dutifully reclined their seats and clicked their belts. But Whitfield remained rigid, as though trapped in the moment of his own disgrace. Whitfield stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. He fidgeted with the corner of his napkin, his thirst for distraction obvious but ineffective. When the flight attendant paused by his seat to collect trash, he mumbled, "I'm sorry, ma'am," without raising his eyes. She offered a small, sympathetic smile. "No harm done, sir," she replied quietly, tucking the napkin into her apron pocket. Her kindness seemed to embarrass him further. He slumped, eyelids heavy. From behind, the college student in 17A leaned forward. "Thank you for doing that, Agent Thompson," she whispered. "I was so uncomfortable." The man beside her nodded. "Yes, thank you." Malik gave a curt nod of acknowledgement. Whitfield's gaze flicked toward them, and the boy's words pierced him like shards of glass. Guilt pooled in Whitfield's chest, so overwhelming he found himself swallowing against a dry throat. Malik watched Whitfield's anguish without judgment. He had no desire to prolong another apology. The point had been made. Yet he recognized that transformation rarely sprang from a single gesture. He tapped his fingers on the briefcase in a measured rhythm. He thought of his report awaiting submission. 2 sections now needing amendment, one on cyber intrusion, the other a candid note on racial profiling. He would include Whitfield's reactions, not as condemnation, but as evidence that bias persisted even in sanitized, high-altitude spaces. The engine's steady thrum deepened as the plane dipped toward the runway. A hush hung between the rows, punctuated only by the occasional beep as a passenger stowed their device. Malik leaned his head back, eyes closing once more. He felt Whitfield's gaze on him and waited. Finally, Whitfield cleared his throat and turned toward Malik, voice low. "Agent Thompson, I'm ashamed of myself." The words trembled with raw sincerity. "I don't deserve your courtesy." Malik opened his eyes, met that gaze, and gave a simple, firm nod. As the runway lights drifted below, signaling the final approach, the cabin remained solemn. Yet something in Whitfield's posture had shifted, an ember of resolve replacing the tight coil of defensiveness. Malik opened his tablet, fingers flying over the screen as he drafted the closing of his report. Prejudice revealed, confronted, and, perhaps, steered toward acknowledgement. The distance between two strangers had shrunk in that metal tube, forged not by data packets or badges alone, but by the quiet courage it took to face one's own shame. When the wheels kissed the tarmac and the seatbelt sign illuminated, the cabin murmured to life again. Passengers adjusted, stuffed belongings into overhead bins, and straightened their collars. Malik stood, gathering his briefcase, then paused in the aisle. He turned to Whitfield, meeting his eyes. Whitfield inclined his head, a wordless apology etched on his face. Malik offered a tight, understanding smile before stepping into the jetway's light. In the gentle press of the airport corridor, the two men walked side by side for a moment, agent and passenger, stitched together by an unexpected reckoning. Behind them, Flight 422's door closed softly, sealing away the hush, the shame, and the small miracle of human understanding that had unfolded above the clouds. Atonement offer. Clarence Whitfield stepped off the jetway into the hum of Washington Dulles Airport's main concourse. Overhead, fluorescent panels flickered, and the echo of rolling suitcases mixed with distant announcements. He paused by a bank of seats near the baggage claim, waiting for Special Agent Malik Thompson to emerge. Malik's crisp FBI blazer stood out among the sea of business suits and travel-worn commuters. Whitfield's heart pounded, each beat a reminder of his earlier demand and the shame that still burned behind his eyes. When Malik rounded the corner, briefcase in hand, Whitfield swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Agent Thompson," he began, voice low but steady. "Thank you for waiting." He gestured toward a quiet corner of the terminal, where a row of potted ferns offered a modicum of privacy. Malik inclined his head and followed, curiosity tempered by professional reserve. The overhead din faded as they settled on adjacent seats, each man a world apart, yet bound by the events of the flight. Whitfield closed his eyes briefly, gathering courage. "I need to apologize properly," he said, voice catching. "Not because you forced it out of me, but because I owe it to you, and to myself." Malik waited, expression unreadable, but his posture suggested he was listening. Whitfield exhaled and glanced at his polished dress shoes. "Growing up, I heard stories. Casual remarks at family dinners, jokes that felt harmless then. I never questioned them, never recognized the weight they carried. When I saw you, I saw those old fears, and I reacted without thinking." Malik folded his hands. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "Admitting prejudice is hard, harder than hiding it." His tone was neither reproachful nor forgiving, but measured, intentional. We all internalize biases before we learn to unlearn them. What matters is what we do next. Whitfield's gaze flickered upward. "Next," he repeated. "I want to do better. I want to understand." A hush fell between them, the distant roar of a departing plane punctuating the space. Whitfield leaned forward, voice earnest. "I've spent my life believing that authority and comfort belonged to people who looked like me. I never saw how those beliefs hurt others. Seeing your badge, seeing you stand so calmly, it made me realize how small-minded I'd been." He paused, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry I made you feel unsafe. I'm sorry I made everyone else uncomfortable." He looked up, bracing for contempt. Instead, Malik offered a slow nod. "Apologies are meaningful, but actions matter more," he said. "If you want to make amends, you can start by speaking up when you hear prejudice, whether at work, among friends, or online. Confront it, challenge it." His gaze was steady, as if daring Whitfield to rise to the challenge. Whitfield straightened, determination replacing shame. "I will," he vowed quietly. "I'll talk to my colleagues at the firm tomorrow. We host weekly meetings. I'll bring it up. I'll hold them accountable, starting with myself." Malik allowed a small, approving smile. "That's a solid start," he said. He set his briefcase beside him and produced a small card embossed with his name and the FBI seal. "If you ever have questions or just want to learn more about the work we do, especially on issues of civil rights, feel free to reach out. Education helps dismantle fear." He handed the card across. Whitfield accepted it, fingertips brushing Malik's hand in a gesture both respectful and tentative. They sat in companionable silence as baggage claims rumbled in the distance, each man processing the significance of their exchange. Whitfield cleared his throat. "I can't erase what happened," he said, "but I can choose not to repeat it." Malik nodded. "That's all anyone can ask." He stood, adjusting his jacket. "I have to get to the office. There's a briefing in 30 minutes. Whitfield rose as well. "And I have an early meeting, but thank you, Agent Thompson, for your patience, your professionalism, and for this conversation." Malik extended his hand. Whitfield grasped it firmly, a silent pact forged in that busy terminal. "Safe travels," Malik said, already stepping away. Whitfield watched him go, then folded the card carefully into his wallet. As he turned toward the baggage claim, he carried more than just his luggage. He carried a newfound commitment to confront his assumptions, to replace fear with understanding. In the echoing corridor, the old shade of prejudice lingered no more. It had been transformed, in a single act of atonement, into a promise of change. Touchdown reckoning. At the glass doors of Washington Dulles Airport, Special Agent Malik Thompson stepped into the rush of arriving travelers. Badge tucked safely in his jacket, He paused under the buzzing overhead lights to catch his breath, replaying the cabin's hush when he'd revealed his credentials. The faces of fellow passengers, alarmed, then astonished, hovered in his mind. It had been more than a display of authority. It had been a moment of collective reckoning, a chance for ordinary people to confront ingrained fear. A white sedan, government-issued and unmarked, waited curbside. Malik slid inside, giving a polite nod to his driver, Agent Ramirez. The city skyline emerged through the tinted windows as the car sped onto the highway. Ramirez glanced at him in the mirror. "Rough flight?" she asked quietly. Malik tapped the card in his pocket, the one Clarence Whitfield had given him. "A reminder," he said, "that even here, prejudice can feel as threatening as any criminal network." Ramirez nodded, and the car merged into traffic, bearing them toward FBI headquarters. Inside the secure garage, Malik ducked under the barrier arm and followed Ramirez up the elevator to a beige corridor lined with mission patches and commendations. The scent of brewing coffee drifted from the bullpen, where agents moved between desks. Deputy Director Henderson met him at the door to the briefing room. "Thompson," he said, voice brisk. "Ready for the update?" Malik set his briefcase on the podium and plugged in a USB drive. Slide after slide of code traces, server maps, and threat timelines filled the screen. Until the final slide appeared, a photo of Flight 422's cabin in mid-incident. A hush fell. Heads pivoted toward the image of Whitfield's scowl, and the moment the FBI badge gleamed under the overhead lights. Malik spoke clearly. "This isn't classified intel, but it's crucial. Prejudice undermines trust as effectively as any breach. When we expose it, we fortify our work." Agents exchanged looks. Henderson nodded. "Included in the training module. Every recruit should see how a single flash of metal can expose deeper vulnerabilities." Malik allowed a small nod. Tonight's mission had expanded beyond cybercrime, into hearts, minds, and the quiet battle against bias. Meanwhile, across town, Clarence Whitfield strode into the lobby of Wilson and Carter LLP. The law firm's polished marble floor reflected his crisp dress shoes as he swiped his keycard. Clutching the card embossed with Malik's name, he rode the elevator past gleaming offices and glass-walled conference rooms. Sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating the Potomac and the monuments beyond. Each floor brought him closer to a new kind of trial, one he intended to begin today in earnest. In the conference room, 20 of Whitfield's colleagues gathered around a mahogany table. He stood at the head, heart pounding. "Thank you for joining me on short notice," he began. The room fell silent, curious eyes tracing the badge he'd placed beside his notebook. "Last night, on a flight to D.C., I confronted something I never challenged before: my own prejudice. I demanded an FBI agent be removed simply because of his appearance." Whitfield paused, shame tightening his throat. He showed his badge. I saw fear in his eyes, fear I had inflicted. "I owe him and all of you an apology." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the group. One senior partner, Ms. Kendall, broke the silence. "Clarence, thank you for your honesty. That took real courage." Whitfield exhaled. "I propose we schedule firm-wide unconscious bias workshops, mandatory for everyone. We'll bring in experts, share stories, and hold ourselves accountable." He outlined a plan: monthly discussion groups, anonymous surveys, and a speaker series on civil rights. Heads nodded. Pens scribbled. By the end of the hour, Wilson and Carter had committed to change. Back on social media, passengers from Flight 422 recounted the incident. A travel blogger's video, how an FBI badge stunned a racist passenger, racked up thousands of views. The hashtag #badge_flash_reckoning trended regionally. Comments poured in. "Never thought I'd see a badge interrupt prejudice mid-air." Kudos to the agent for keeping calm, and to the passenger for admitting fault. Malik monitored the chatter on a secure terminal, allowing himself a brief smile. The digital echo was no substitute for real dialogue, but it meant the story had traveled far beyond the cabin. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the nation's capital, Malik drafted a memo to the Civil Rights Division. Flight 422 incident, case study on prejudice. He recommended guest lectures at local universities, and an online training module open to the public. If one badge flash could spark thousands of conversations online and ignite policy changes in a law firm, perhaps it could help dismantle deeper biases in communities across America. Clarence Whitfield also reflected on his ride home. In the rearview mirror, he studied his reflection. Older, yes, but now lined with resolve instead of arrogance. He reached into his jacket for Malik's card, tracing the letters with his finger. "Speak up," it reminded him. "Challenge what's comfortable." He whispered a quiet promise. "I will." In the glow of the streetlights, he understood that justice wasn't confined to courtrooms or police stations. It lived in everyday choices to call out fear and ignorance. That night, separate yet united by a shared reckoning, both men dreamed of a future where a badge meant not just authority, but accountability. Where a single flash of metal could spark change not only in one heart or one cabin, but across a nation. And as dawn approached, each man carried with him the same fragile hope. That real justice begins the moment we turn prejudice into possibility. Beyond the badge, the fluorescent glare of Malik Thompson's office was a stark contrast to the dim cockpit lights of Flight 422. As he settled into his leather chair, the soft hum of server fans and distant phone ringers filled the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrime Division. Malik placed his briefcase on the polished oak desk and opened his laptop. On the screen lay two half-finished documents: the technical report on the ransomware syndicate he'd just dismantled, and a blank memo titled Flight 422, Prejudice Incident, Case Study. He exhaled slowly, fingertips hovering over the keyboard. The cybercrime report was straightforward: charts of network traffic, timelines of intrusion, recommendations for enhanced security protocols. But the case study required a different approach, one that melded policy analysis with human insight. He tapped the title line and began. On June 26, 2025, Flight 422 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., became the unlikely venue for a confrontation between ingrained bias and legitimate authority. Special Agent Thompson's display of his badge precipitated an immediate transformation in passenger attitudes and demonstrated the latent power of transparency in dismantling prejudice. He paused, recalling the hush that fell over the cabin as the badge gleamed under the overhead lamp. He remembered the ripple of applause. As much as the malware architect posed a threat to public utilities, that moment of collective reckoning, when fear gave way to respect, felt equally vital. Prejudice, he knew, was an epidemic no less dangerous than any virus code. He continued typing, outlining 3 objectives for the memo. Training module integration. Incorporate the Flight 422 exchange into every agent's civil rights training. Public outreach. Develop partnerships with community organizations to share the case study, emphasizing everyday responsibility to challenge bias. Cross-agency collaboration. Recommend similar modules for the Department of Homeland Security and local police academies. In the margin, he scribbled a note. Badge not as shield, but mirror. At that moment, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Wilson and Carter LLP. Malik answered. Agent Thompson. Mr. Thompson, this is Clarence Whitfield. His voice sounded steadier than Malik remembered. Less haunted, more purposeful. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Malik replied, leaning back. How can I help you? I wanted to let you know that the firm's first unconscious bias workshop is scheduled for next Monday, Whitfield said. We've invited civil rights speakers and local community leaders. We'd like you to give a brief talk. Just 5 minutes on why confronting bias matters. There was a pause then. Would you be willing? Malik considered the request. He'd never addressed a corporate audience before, but this was an extension of his case study, an opportunity to amplify the lesson beyond DC's law firms. He smiled. I'd be honored. They arranged the details, and Malik hung up feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He returned to his memo and inserted a new section. Corporate partnerships. Leverage relationships with private firms to broaden the impact of civil rights training. Satisfied, he saved the document. Just then, his deputy, Agent Ramirez, poked her head in. You staying late? She asked, stepping inside with 2 coffees. Yeah, Malik said, accepting the cup. Finishing up the Flight 422 report. It's not exactly classified intel, but I think it could change how we approach bias training. Ramirez nodded, handing him the coffee. I read the initial draft on your tablet. Powerful stuff. You're turning a negative incident into a blueprint for positive change. He shrugged modestly. It felt like the right thing to do. He stared at the blank lines following the signature. What I want is for people to understand that authority isn't just about enforcement. It's about accountability. Ramirez smiled. Well, message received. You want me to review it before you send? Absolutely, he said. Thanks. As Ramirez left, Malik closed his laptop and stood, stretching. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk. His badge, ceremonially presented at the FBI Academy's graduation ceremony. Now that badge symbolized more than rank. It signified the potential to bridge divides. That Monday morning, Malik arrived at Wilson and Carter's glass-walled conference room, badge tucked behind his jacket. Whitfield greeted him with a firm handshake that conveyed genuine respect. Rows of attorneys, paralegals, and staff sat in neat chairs, their faces intent. The air smelled of fresh coffee and anticipation. Whitfield introduced him. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Special Agent Malik Thompson of the FBI. He was on Flight 422 on June 26 and turned an act of racism into an opportunity for learning. I'm grateful he's here to share his insights. Malik stepped to the lectern. He cleared his throat. Good morning. I want to thank Mr. Whitfield for inviting me. What happened on that flight could have ended in humiliation or confrontation. Instead, it became a moment of shared accountability, and it can be a model for all of us. He described the exchange. First the discomfort, then the demand for removal, then the badge's reveal, and finally the hush and reluctant applause. He spoke candidly about the fear he sensed and the shame that followed. When we confront our biases, he said, we start to tear down the invisible barriers that divide us. He highlighted 3 lessons. Visibility of authority. Transparency can diffuse hostility. Ownership of mistakes. Acknowledging wrongdoing paves the way for reconciliation. Collective responsibility. Everyone has a role in challenging prejudice. Heads nodded, pens scribbled. Malik concluded. Real justice extends beyond the courtroom or the keyboard. It lives in moments where we choose to call out fear, to demand better of ourselves. He stepped back amid warm applause. Over the following weeks, Malik's case study circulated within the FBI and to partner agencies. Wilson and Carter's workshops sparked similar initiatives at 2 other major firms. Online articles and a short documentary, featuring anonymized reenactments, reached thousands. Social media comments praised the proactive stance, but also acknowledged personal reflections. I took the quiz on unconscious bias, and was shocked by my results. One morning, Malik received an email from a high school principal in Seattle. Can you share your lesson plan with our diversity club? We want to discuss your Flight 422 case. He replied affirmatively, drafting a simplified version of his briefing. Soon, a video conference linked him to students across the country, their eager faces lighting up his computer screen. Months later, Malik stood again at his desk, reviewing updates. New training modules, corporate partnerships, educational outreach. His cybercrime caseload remained heavy, but the momentum he'd set in motion on that fateful flight carried on. The badge tucked in his pocket still gleamed beneath his jacket, not just as proof of authority, but as an emblem of accountability. Late one evening, he logged into a secure forum where agents shared lessons learned. A comment from Ramirez read, Chapter 8 complete, beyond the badge. A thread followed, stories of small, everyday interventions turning the tide against bias in precincts, boardrooms, and classrooms. Malik smiled, closing his laptop. He turned off the overhead light, leaving the office bathed in the soft glow of city lights through the window. He paused at the door, hand on the frame, and looked out over the Capitol's skyline, the Jefferson Memorial's columns, the Washington Monument's obelisk standing guard. Justice, like those monuments, was built stone by stone, choice by choice. He stepped into the corridor, the badge nestled close to his heart. Above the clouds and beyond the cabin's hush, Kenneth Whitfield's apology had sparked a movement. Now, each new voice added another chapter, another testament that real justice begins when we flash our badges not to intimidate, but to illuminate the path forward.